Good morning, everybody. How are we doing? This is Jeremiah. We are having another webinar, this one on templates. This will be fun. Templates is one of those parts of AutoCAD that, I would say probably the vast majority of people don't do a darn thing with them. And then, a good chunk of people basically over customize them and overuse what they're there for. And anyway, it's definitely a bit of a change of mindset in switching to using land effects if you are used to having this wildly customized template that we definitely recommend a different way of utilizing them, which this webinar is going to go over real best practices with templates. So if that sounds exciting to you, then you're in the right place. So I just have a couple super quick housekeeping items, and then we'll get going. Want to remind you all this is being recorded, so it'll be available up on the website later today. But right now, though, it is live and in person. We are here. So you are welcome to get your questions in. We really do want that interactivity with you. So there's that little button at the bottom of the window that says Q&A. That stands for questions and answers. Go ahead and click it now, get it situated. What's nice is not only will make that easier for you to type in a question to us, but you're going to be able to see the answers that we type to other people's questions. And we'll, of course, also be answering the questions live here in the webinar. So you'll get to hear your name read out loud on a webinar broadcast around the world. That's kind of exciting, right? So, all right, that's my housekeeping. Hey, Paul, let's take this one away.
All right, thank you, Jer. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Friday webinar. My name is Paul, and today we're going to be looking at using templates, as Jer mentioned. And of course, the word template is used in a few places when using land effects. So we thought it might be helpful to explain what the different templates are and also give some pointers on how to use them effectively. Here's just a quick outline of what we are going to go over today. First up, we're going to do like a side-by-side of drawing templates and project templates and just clearly define what each of those are. Then we'll go a little bit deeper into drawing templates and then move on to project templates. And then we'll jump into CAD and I'll actually give a demonstration of creating each of these items. So I wanted to first throw up just kind of a simple definition of what a template is, at least in a computer world. And so this is pertaining more to like a word processing, but a template is a pre-created document that is already set up with preliminary tasks. You can use the templates to save yourself a lot of time because it moves the starting point of a new document further along than if you were to start from scratch. And so down here, we have a few examples of resume templates that you might find in like Microsoft Word. And even though it's like the same information, they are set up differently. And so the page is already formatted and the text styles are already set up. So really you can open up one of these templates and just apply the information to it without having to go through and create all of that extra style preferences and formatting from scratch. Okay, so and then when we're working in land effects, of course, we're also working in AutoCAD. And in AutoCAD, a drawing template is a copy of a drawing file or a DWG file. That can include all kinds of AutoCAD objects and drawing settings. And the drawing template is saved as a DWT file. And basically, yeah, it's just a copy of that DWG. And whereas in land effects, you will be working with a project template, which is a separate template than your drawing template. And this is just a copy of all of that precious data in your project. And then I just put down here below because there is another template that is used, and that's the detail template. And that's like a title block for your details. I'm not really going to go into detail templates in this presentation, unless there is some time at the end and you want to actually see some information on detailed templates, but we're going to mostly exclude those from this presentation. So let's dive into drawing templates. So what is a DWT? And what that is a file that AutoCAD uses to create a new drawing file. And it's essentially the same thing as a DWG. It holds a lot of the same information. Actually, it holds pretty much all the same information, but it a DWT file. So if you have never set up anything up in AutoCAD and you go to new drawing, you're probably going to be pulling from the acad.dwt. And that is just a pretty basic AutoCAD template for that new drawing. And why we set up drawing templates and why they're useful is that it saves time by removing the need for that preliminary drawing setup. It also ensures that your drawing setup is consistent across all of your drawings and among your Office team members. And it enforces your Office standards. So you can set those up and you can rest assured that from the get-go, you're going to be using those settings for every drawing moving forward. And if your office shares the same DWT, then everyone in your office is going to be starting with those same settings. And so as I mentioned before, what can be saved in a DWT is pretty much anything that's saved into a DWG or a drawing file. That could include drawing space settings or your workspace settings, block definitions, annotation styles like your dimension styles and text styles, and M-leader styles, your various line work and AutoCAD geometry, layer settings, layout settings, etc. So if you're new to Land Effects or you've worked in an AutoCAD only environment, you may have seen or worked with this kind of template, which is basically a file that has all of your stuff in it. You got different line types, your layers are set up, you've got different text objects that you can quickly copy and paste around. Maybe you have your plant lists or your plant schedules already filled out in a way so that you can just quickly edit the text. Also, you have different scales of annotated objects like your callouts, and maybe you have various blocks as well, or symbols that you use for trees and shrubs, and hatches for ground covers, title blocks, maybe even some details. And when you're working in an AutoCAD environment without Land Effects, this is not a bad way to do it, because you are very quickly able to copy these objects around. You don't have to draw them from scratch each time that you work in AutoCAD. And so it does when since you are working with Land Effects, you don't need to have all of those items in there. The things that you might consider adding to a DWT file with Land Effects are items such as your unit settings, your preferred drawing space settings, such as the grid display, and maybe a layout page setup so that you don't have to resize your pages each time you open up a new file. And you no longer need a cluttered drawing template because Land Effects provides resources to organize and store all of that clutter. For a quick 5-minute video, this is a great reference for setting up your DWT template. Check out the power tip that Amanda did last year. Head over to landeffects.com/powertips, and she goes into what you need to do to basically simplify your template. And it's really helpful, especially if you're trying to do this after this webinar and you don't want to sift through the entire webinar just for that information. That power tip is gold. So here are a few resources that Land Effects has to help you manage those template items so that you can avoid all that clutter. First up is layer states. This allows you to store information into a .lay file for better organization and quick access. Since just about everything should be set to by layer, this is really helpful in storing information for line types, color of objects, and plot style, transparency, all that layer information, and your preferred layer naming convention can all be saved into a .lay file and then quickly accessible when you open up a new drawing. Additionally, we have preference sets, which allows you to manage your text styles, your default Land FX layer settings, callout styles, dimension styles, and even your scheduled default settings, at least for planting. So that takes care of managing all of that for you, so you don't have to clutter up your file with examples of those placed in your model space. And then, of course, we have our block libraries, which holds all of our current block content, but it also allows you to save your own blocks and block content into a nice, neat, and organized dialog box, which is accessible in any drawing moving forward. And it's really great because you don't have to have all of those blocks defined in each drawing that you use. I highly doubt that you would be utilizing every single block in your template if you had your template set up that way. So with the block libraries, you're able to just pull the blocks that you're going to use and define those in your drawing without having all this extraneous stuff. So now let's take a look at project templates. And so what is a project template? It's just a read-only version of a project set or project data. If you're not super familiar with what the project data is, it's probably the most important aspect of Land FX, as it is all the information behind the Land FX content that allows it to work intelligently with our tools. A template can be used for importing data into a new project. And one thing to keep in mind is the only way to make changes to a template is to create a project with those changes and overwrite the template. Because the template is read-only, it has the benefit of being pretty safe from being altered or changed, mistakenly or otherwise. And so you always have this read-only project that you can use as your template and pull that precious data from. And I just wanted to show this. I've done this in a couple webinars. Just a little peek at what is going on behind what you're seeing in Land FX. Each of these is a single plant. So this is a Quercus chrysopolis or chrysolepis canyon live oak. And so this is just that data that applies to a single plant. And so any project is going to have dozens to hundreds of different little sections of code like this that translates to that data. And all this is, it has the, what the plant code is, where it's grouped into, what symbol the plant is attached to, some of the plant size data, like it's a 2.5-inch caliper tree with WBs probably wrapped and burlapped, remarks, etc. And so one of these is pulled from a backup of a project, and one of these is pulled from a backup of the project template. And they're the exact same. So it's just a little sneak peek there. And in this image here, that's that tree that I showed on the previous slide, as you would see it in Land FX. And so this is that data that we're talking about. It's the plant name, the code, what block or blocks it might be tied to, and any other information behind it, like cost and size and remarks. All of that is what we call the plant data or the project data, specifically for a plant. And so the project template is simply just a copy of that. And so what can be saved into a project template? All of your planting information, reference notes, concept graphics, irrigation equipment, concept plans, details tied to a project, and also sheets tied to a project. And there's an asterisk on irrigation because we don't actually recommend using irrigation equipment in a template, but I might talk about that a bit in a bit. And so why do you use project templates? To keep your standardized project data safe. So because it is read-only, it's pretty well protected from one being assigned to a drawing and then changed, probably accidentally. And then also once you set it up, you're not able to just open it up and then make all these changes without the rest of your team knowing about it, because it is that read-only. It's set up as read-only. Another reason to use it is that it's quickly available for any project. So when you go to start any new project, you can pull from that template and already have, say, your planting information already set up. So you don't have to assign it a cost again, assign it a new symbol, or any of the size options. All that is already set to it. And so you can basically just pull that information from the template and then start placing plants or site amenities or whatever you have saved into your template. And so if you set this up one time, then you might need to only set it up that one time for any project moving forward. Another benefit for templates is the situation where you have a repeat client. So if you have your specific office settings and style that you adhere to for most projects, but then a certain client that you're going to be doing a couple projects for has a very specific style needs or information needs, you can set up a template for that client. And then any project that you start for that client, you can just right away start with all of their standards right off the bat. And then, of course, you can, once you take the information from your project template into a new project, you can still make changes to that project after it's pulled from the template. So you're not tied down to what is set into the template, like that's not set in stone. On a project basis, you can still alter any sort of that information in there, but it's still beneficial because you might be changing, say, the plant's cost, but you want to keep the same plant symbol and all the other information in there. So you only have to make one change instead of creating the object from scratch. And all this means is that with templates, you can pretty much get straight to designing. And here's just a couple of tips that we have for working with project templates. If you're considering setting up a template for the first time, make sure that you have at least a couple of projects completed. One of the reasons that we recommend this is that, especially if you're a newer client, working through a couple of projects lets you sort of fine tune how you're going to be working with land effects. And so you have that familiarity when you go to create that template, which is going to be used over and over and over again. And so having a couple of projects under your belt would certainly be a good idea before you do that. But also, if you have a couple of projects, then you probably have a bunch of items such as site amenities and planting and all those objects already set up. And so you can actually just very quickly build your template from those existing projects. Another tip is to plan this out with your team so that everyone is on the same page when you're working with a project template. When you are going to create your template, you can base it off of an existing project. But if you have a couple of projects and you want to pull information from each of your projects, then you'll probably want to start a new project and just make that sort of the master project that you then save your template from. And again, you can always alter the information on a project basis, even if it is set in a template. And of course, you can create more than one template. So I do see a question here. I don't know if you want me to answer that now before we move on to the demonstration.
Go ahead. I'm still kind of typing away that answer, and then we get
Okay.
a chance later. We'll circle back because it's a really good question.
Yeah, and I actually will probably show it right now anyways. So how do I close? There we go. All right, so let's move into CAD and see how we can work with these different template items. So here is that file that was actually given to me by Amanda for that power tip that I mentioned earlier. But this is kind of a mock-up of what you might see if you were working in an AutoCAD environment. You basically just have different line type settings, different, looks like line widths with their respective colors per layer. If we open up our layer properties manager, looks like we have a bunch of layers in here. And then some kind of generic notes and text that you might want to provide on each sheet set. And callouts and plant symbols and hatches. So all this content that previous, like before Land Effects, you might have off to the side of your plan. And then when you go to place a plant, you would just copy one of these symbols and place it around, or copy a plant callout and fill it out as necessary. So all that kind of manual editing of these objects and placement is all automated now with Land Effects. So we can basically get rid of all of this. And I just wanted to show where some of these objects live within Land Effects and what you can do to set up some of these other items so that you still have them available very quickly, but you don't have to have them cluttering up your model space. So first up is the layer states. And so if you do have a template like this that you're working with, and you have all of these layers set up the way that you like them, and you're going to continue using these layers, you don't necessarily need them in your drawing template, but you can save them as a layer state so that you can quickly access them in any future drawing. And how you do that is just very quick. In your FX admin tab, go up to this layers or save layers button. And it's going to pull up in the layers folder within your Land Effects folder. And you can save these layers into one of our existing folders here, or you can create your own folder. Maybe you want to have your own specific folder for your office and just give it a name. So I don't know what we call this, but maybe landscape plan layers. And so in any new drawing going forward, I don't have to have all these layers defined in there. I can go up to the load layers button. And anything within the brackets is going to be those folders. So you can click OK and go into that folder, select the layer state that we just saved. And it's going to pull in all those layers and all the different settings. So you don't have to do that from scratch or have them present in your DWT. And why you might want to do this over having them saved in your drawing template is you can actually have multiple layer states. So if you have layers for a planting plan or layers for a site development plan or an irrigation plan, you might actually want to save each of those groups of layers as separate layer states so that you only really need to pull in the layers that you're actually going to be using for that specific drawing. Whereas if it's saved into a drawing template, you're probably going to have one template for all applications, and you're just going to have just a ton of layers in there that this isn't that many, but plans can certainly build up a lot of layers, especially, and you just want to, I like simplifying my work as much as possible and having less layers to sift through when I'm doing design work is very beneficial with time. So that's how you would save and load layer states. And of course, since everything is by layer, or should be by layer, that also manages like your line types, because you can set your layers to what line types they are, transparency, line weights, colors as well. So all of your standard colors for those objects should probably be saved to the layer. And so the layer state actually includes a whole bunch of different items that you want to be saving into your standards. And then additionally, we have, let me try to stop zooming in and out so much. Things like text styles, and maybe you have dimension styles that your office uses. All of that information is stored into our preference settings. And so to access your preference set in any of these LandFX ribbons, there should be an icon with looks like a page with a gear on it. Click on any one of those, and it's going to open up your preference set dialog box right here. And this holds all of that sort of standardized information. Unlike project data, preferences can be applied to any project or drawing that you're working with. And so this is that sort of information that you want to reach across all of your projects, because it will hold a lot of your office standards. So that'll include various text styles that you're going to be using for objects. Like if you're placing plant callouts, this is the text style for that. And this is where you would manage that text style. So you choose your point size. There's a really big point size. The font that is attributed to it, etc. And so all that is managed in your preference set. And you can obviously have more than one preference set, but you can apply, a single preference set to any and all projects you want. Additionally, to textiles, in here we have layer settings. So these are all the LandFX default layers. So any of our block content or content in general will come in on a layer that we've standardized, and we have our own naming standards. But if you want to edit any of those to match your office standards, you can do that here. Additionally, you can save a unique dim style into your preference set, so that anytime you place a dim style while using this preference set, whenever you place a dimension while using this preference set, your custom dimension style will come in. When it comes to plant schedules, you can set up your schedule defaults here under the planting preferences. And so that just pulls open the plant schedule options dialog box here. If you don't set this up in your preferences, you'll have to basically alter these settings for each project. So if you have a very specific style or amount of information that you want to apply to each plant schedule, you might consider setting those up in your preferences, so that anytime you're using this preference set, it'll apply to your schedules moving forward. So in addition to those objects, we've basically covered the need for these objects and plant lists, how to customize those in your preferences, but then also our plant lists and schedules are automated. So it's a one-click button to get all of this. So we don't really need to have those in there. I guess plant callout is another preference here that I didn't quite highlight, but your plant label is located in your planting preferences. And so we have these different plant callout types, but you can customize these as well. So you might consider saving your custom plant style in here, or plant label style in here if you do have a need to have a style that's different than what we already have. So that is also managed in your preferences. So we don't need the plant callouts. These symbols, we have a big library of plant symbols already that you can use for your plants. But if, say, this symbol isn't in our library, you have a very specific plant symbol that you want to use, you can totally add those in to the block library and access them anytime you are working with plants. And just very quickly, how you can do that is in your planting ribbon, there is a button, I believe it's here, under generic plants called Save Plant Block. And if you click on that, you're going to want to follow the prompts down in the command line. But it says pick an insertion point. And so for a planting symbol, you're going to be clicking the middle of a circular object like this. And that's where basically the plant's going to be inserted. And then it says select objects. And because this is not already a block, I'm going to actually want to select the align objects and then press enter once it's selected. And it's going to take you to the folders in which you save your different plants. So maybe you have your own naming convention for your different tree blocks. Maybe it says I, because it's in the I row. And just click OK. And you've saved that into the block library. So now if I have a plant, just open up a tester project here. Okay, so I have a ginkgo tree that I want to tie to that symbol. And now that I've saved it into my library, I can edit that plant. And I've got my office plants here, office tree. If you're concerned about the extra lines in this preview, that's because the slide was taken with, a grid around those trees. So you can reshoot that slide, or you can basically open up this symbol, and so that you just get the block, and then shoot the slide with M slide. But anyway, so but that won't actually affect the block. That's just the preview of the block. So here's that tree that I've now assigned a block to, and it's coming in on a layer for plants, LP tree. So that's why the color is a little different. But you can save your own blocks into our libraries. We have our plant libraries. We have under site, you can save graphics into plan graphics, elevation graphics, discipline graphics. Like, for example, if you do want to be able to copy around, say, these planting notes into your desired sheets, you can save this as a discipline graphic and then place that in. And it's the same process. Going to your save block. This time I'm in the FX site. And then pick an insertion point, probably the upper left, selecting those objects, pressing enter, and then saving into the folder that you want it to be saved into. So it's probably going to be user defined. And looks like I already have one in here, but planting prep notes. And so what that allows you to do is to then go to those discipline graphics in this dropdown. And under user defined, I have my planting prep block here. Just I can click OK and quickly place those into any drawing moving forward. And that same process basically applies to your title blocks and any other kind of basic blocks that don't need to have data behind them. Callouts are handled automatically through the callout tools. Hatches, you can also save your hatches into the hatch libraries. I guess those are a little different than the block libraries because they're hatches, but it's largely the same process of finding a hatch pattern or having a hatch pattern in your drawing and clicking the save hatch button versus the save block button and selecting the hatch and choosing where you want it to save. So this is probably going to be like a site hatch. And saving that in there. So now if you go to your hatch library under site, should have one in here, should be alphabetical right here. Once again, that preview image is a slide file. And so to get a better looking preview, you'll want to reshoot the slide. And I would check out our documentation on saving hatches into your library to get a more in-depth look on how to actually save these in and shoot a better looking slide for that preview. And same with saving blocks into the system. We have a really good guide on how you save the blocks and then shoot the slides so that they look a lot better there. But I've saved that hatch in, so I should be able to just quickly draw on a hatch pulling from the library. So using these dialog boxes, the block libraries and your preferences and all that, it's a really great way to work a lot cleaner than having all of this extra stuff in your model space. And it's all very accessible through your ribbon buttons here. So let's go into creating a new template. So if you do have a drawing like this, you might want to pull some of those objects as I went through. Save out those things that you actually want to be using commonly and save your layer states. But if you're going to be setting up a new drawing template with LandFX, you're going to want to start with the new drawing. Just start fresh and clean, and then work up from there. And since the drawing template no longer needs a lot of stuff in it, it should be a very quick process just to set this up. So when I click that plus button, it opened up a new drawing. And this drawing is based on the AutoCAD.DWT. That's the default AutoCAD drawing template. And so if you have not set up a drawing template or altered what AutoCAD is using for that new drawing, you'll probably be opening the same DWT. If you are not getting this drawing template, you can go down to the new button and choose that AutoCAD.DWT. If you're working with FXCAD, you should also have these LAFX DWTs available. And these are templates that we've already set up with the unit settings that are displayed in the name. So if I want to work with architectural inches, I can pull this open and it'll open up a drawing already set up. So you might not even have to set up a DWT yourself. But if you were going to do that, you might want to start with the AutoCAD.DWT, and then the items that you actually want to save into your template are likely your unit settings. So you want to type units to open that up and make sure that you're going to be setting it to the units that you're going to be working with moving forward. If you think that you might be using different types of units, you might want to set up multiple DWTs, or you could just use the LAFX ones that are available already. So set your units, and then alter things like this grid. I don't think anyone needs to have that grid on. I know personally I don't want it there. And what else? We have a documentation page on this as well. So if you want to read through working with drawing templates, we have a few tips here and settings and a guide on how to set that up. But in addition to setting up your units, we also recommend setting PSLT scale and LT scale to 1. That's just a line type scale and paper space line type scale. Scale. It's already set at 1. I think by default, these settings will already apply. But it's not a bad idea that if you're setting up a new template, just to check and make sure that these are both set to 1. And that's just going to ensure that your line type scales, when you're placing them into the drawing, will display properly. And then the next setting that we recommend confirming or changing is setting UCS follow to 0. So that's just command UCS follow. And if it's not at 0, make sure you hit 0 and press enter. And that'll just ensure that when you have a UCS in the drawing, that it displays everything properly. Okay. This is important. When you are setting up a DWT, don't assign a LandFX project to it. You don't want to have project data assigned to your drawing template because each new project should have a new project data set. And so you don't want to have a conflict between what is associated to your fresh new drawing versus the project that is supposed to be with it. So you want to make sure that you're setting up a new project data set for each new project that you're working on. And so, yeah, don't create a LandFX project or assign a LandFX project to your drawing template. And then other than that, those few basic settings, that's really all you need in your drawing template. So if you're setting this up, you get to this point, you just want to go ahead and save that. And to do so, go up to this drop down here. If you're in AutoCAD, this will be a different symbol. And go down to Save As. And if you hover over Save As, you get to choose what format you're going to be saving as. And you want to choose Drawing Template. If you don't hover over it, you might come up with this dialog box in which you just want to drop this format down and choose the AutoCAD Drawing Template option. And it's going to take you to where those default templates live. So here's our ACAD and our LandFX templates. And you can totally save it in here. But if you're going to be sharing this template with other people in your office and you have a server set up, you might want to actually save this onto that server so that everyone can access the same drawing template. But you just give it a name, whatever name you want to give it, and hit save. That box is largely unimportant. And now you've saved it. So you can now open up a new drawing based on that template by going to New Drawing and choosing Office Template or whatever you called it. Now, if you click on this new drawing or you do the command Q new, it's not going to open up that template. It doesn't know yet that that's the template you want to be using for your new drawings. So if you do want to set this up on your workstation so that each time you open up a new drawing with this plus symbol or using the command Q new, you can do that through your options. And to open up options, just type in options in the command line, press enter, and go into this files tab here. And you want to go down to template settings and just expand this little file folder tree here. And go down to default template file name for Q new. Click on this address here to select it, and then click on this browse button. And then you can navigate to that new template. Click open, apply, and OK. So now that when I open up a new drawing, it's going to pull the DWT that we just set up. And so all those settings should now be applied to any new drawing. Okay, before I move on to project templates, are there any questions on drawing templates?
I mean, I think yeah, I think we got them covered pretty well. And I was just thinking how, just particularly in comparison to that like example old school template you showed, certainly at first it can seem like, oh my gosh, all this land effects stuff is saved in like 5 different places, and how am I going to keep track of it? And admittedly, yeah, it takes a little bit to wrap your brain around it, but the other side of it is, you open up some old project that you need to work on, and you need to do something, and what if that's something you need to do is not there, if you did that old style of template, it just is not a good way to work, and as opposed to, if you want to put in a leader, you click on the leader button and it'll be created on the fly based on whatever standards are in preferences, and so on. And so hopefully people are seeing the light that it just definitely is a more flexible and efficient system, but it just does take, just like with AutoCAD, you've got your keyboard shortcut is one file, and your AutoCAD line type is another file, and your AutoCAD hatch patterns is another file, and it is multiple files that you need to back up and be aware of. But it is a better way to go. So hopefully that wasn't too much blabbering, but yeah, let's keep on going.
Alrighty. Okay, so let's just quickly go over project templates. For a more in-depth look at planting project templates, I would check out I think it's called Working with Planting Templates or something like that. Well, we have a webinar on it from 2016 that goes into a pretty deep dive specifically on planting project templates, and it's really good. The only difference, or the only thing that's been updated in that from what I could see, is that plant groups in that webinar was mentioned that they don't carry over or import from templates, but they do now. So otherwise the information is all good there. But let's set up a project template. So here I'm in a blank drawing, and I'm just going to open up my projects here. And I just have a few projects in here already that I've mostly used for examples, but let's say I've completed full projects and I have these different projects in my list here. I'm just going to open up this one here. It's kind of my go-to example because it's pretty filled out with a bunch of stuff, and clearly I'm test on it as well. So here we have this different plant information, and we also have reference notes, and we have irrigation data, all these different items with project data behind them, and they're already set up. So the quickest way to save a template is to just go when you have a filled out project already set up and save it as a template. There's a button here in your project list box, and you just hit save as template. Give it a name. It'll tell you that it's been created. And now in that same box, you have this nice clear divider that says templates. And then anything under that is going to be your different templates. And then once again, that's that read-only copy of that project that I had selected. So anything that I had in this project that I was showing, the planting, the ref notes and whatnot, that's all now saved into this template. So that's a very quick way to do it, to set up a template. If you do have like a massive project that contains just about everything that you think you're going to be using going forward, you're totally welcome to just go ahead and save that project as a template. But I think more likely than that, you're going to have maybe a few projects with different items within them, and you're going to want to compile a big project to save as a template. So instead of just opening up a project and then saving it as a template, you'll probably want to go ahead and create a new project. And you probably want to give this a pretty clear name as to what it's being used for. maybe template, master project or something, and click OK. And now, so this is a blank project, but you can very quickly add in objects from those other projects that you've already set up into this project and really fill it out to be very comprehensive. And then you can save that as a template. So a way to add in your planting information from a different project is to go down in the plant manager to that import button and select a project that you want to use. And since I'm in trees, it's going to pull up in all the different trees in that project. And if I want to add them all, I can just select the top one, hold down the shift key, and select the bottom one, and click add a project. And there are a few in here, and it's basically, making a copy of all that product data. So it might take a few seconds. But once you do that, it does pull over all that information. So all this data from that other project is now copied over into this new project. So I can go through and continue doing this with different projects if I have different projects with different plant information. It looks like I already have probably all of these in there. I tend to use the same plants a lot. But if they were different, you could pick and choose which plants you want to add in from those different projects and add those in. Go through with trees and shrubs, shrubberies and ground covers. If you do use, say, concept plants and you have different concept design groups that you want to import into a project as well, use that import button up here. Select a project that actually has concept groups set up and import those in. And it's going to pull up in that design group and the associated plants with that. Same basic process for these other modules as well. So ref notes, we have a import button on that. And you can just click on one of these projects, add in the data, and it should be set up the way that it was set up in that previous project. Now, once you go through this new master project that you're going to be turning into a template, you'll probably want to make sure that you are keeping a note or an inventory of everything that's in here and going through each one and editing it and making sure that the information within is the information that you want to be using moving forward. Because if you're going to be using this template for future projects, it's probably going to be there for a while. And I would prefer not to be updating a template every few weeks because I didn't carefully plan out what I was going to be using in my template. But go through all your different information, set it up, make sure it's all looking the way that you want to be using it moving forward. The reason that we don't recommend doing this with irrigation, and you totally can, the tools are there to import irrigation equipment and save as a template as well. But irrigation equipment is always being updated and changing. And so if you're going to have a template that you're using for the next 5 years, likely some of that equipment that is in the irrigation manager might change. And therefore, what the manufacturer is producing is different than what you are specifying in your irrigation equipment. And so with irrigation, we tend to recommend that you add in the equipment as you actually use these projects. But once you have everything dialed in and you want to save that template, once again, you just go up to your project list. And with that master project selected, do a save as template. Let's see, call it something cool this time. And now you have that template. So you have a template set up, and now you want to use the template going forward. There are a couple ways to do this as well. Let's open up a new drawing, and let's say that we're creating a new project, and we're going to base it off that master template. So since I've already set up my drawing template, I know that my units are set and that my workspace is how I want to be working. So there's not really much drawing set up there. And I can just right away go into creating a project. So I go to my project list, hit new, give it a name, select your preference set that you want to be using. And then the quickest way to use a template for a new project is to use this based on dropdown. And so you can basically just select that template, and it's going to go through and recognize what area information is there for. So I saved in some planting information, concept plans, and ref notes. I did not save any details, sheets, or irrigation items in. So it knows that. And so it knows that I can only import these objects. And so if this was just going to be a planting project, I can unclick these, other items that I'm not going to be using and just like planting. And when I click OK, it's going to right away import all of that information into my new project. The reason that we don't typically recommend going this route, though, is that your master template might have anything and everything that you will ever use throughout your career as a landscape architect. And because of that, you might have a very, very large list of plants or a large list of site furnishings and all these other items that you might not be using in that specific project. And so it's once again, if you're going to be trying to simplifying your work, you might not want to pull in everything from your master template into a single project when it's not all going to be used, and it's just going to get in the way, which is, takes time to sift through 1,000 plants to find the right one that you want. It might not take that much time, but it does take time. So instead, what we'd recommend for most users is that when you go to create a new project, set it up the same way, but don't base it on a template. Instead, click OK. And so once again, you have this blank drawing or blank project. And then when you need to add in items from your template, you can go to your plant manager or your ref note manager or your concept plant manager and use that import button again. This time, instead of pulling from previous projects, pull from the template that you set up. And that way, you know that you're working with project data that is meant to be used from the template and also set up properly, because this information can change on a project to project basis. And then, just go through and pick and choose, hold down the control key and select, just the items that you're actually going to be using for this project. This way you can really whittle down all of that very different objects and different data sets that you don't really need to use in this project. So you get to pick and choose what you're actually going to use, therefore having a much simpler work environment. Of course, you do have to click the add to project, not just done. So that's how we recommend importing items from your template. You can obviously just base it on the template and have everything show up right away. It might be just a lot of extra stuff that you don't need in there. Okay, and lastly, I just wanted to show backing up and restoring templates, project templates, because even though the templates are set to read only and you can't really edit them by opening it up and making edits, you can overwrite them. Accidents happen, or something could happen to your installation or computer. And so if you spend a whole bunch of time creating a template, it's highly recommended that you also make a backup of your template file, so that if something does happen, you can revert to that template. So the way to do this is, once again, in your project list, go to that template that you spent oh so long on making it perfect, and click on the backup button. And then go to backup project to LFX file. Click OK. And save this somewhere that is safe, like a server location, or somewhere that maybe it's not saved in with like your other data backups, because something could happen to your LandFX file and your project template. You want to have it someplace separate than everything else, so that you have a good way of going back to it and minimizing the, I guess, a fail point there. So give it a name, save it somewhere. I'm just going to save it on my desktop because it's an example. You don't want to save it on your desktop probably, but you should be able to see that. Hopefully my desktop's not too cluttered with hidden files. Aha. All right, so this is what the template backup looks like. It's a .lfx file. It's the same kind of file as a preference set backup and a project backup, except that it has some kind of indicator here letting you know that it's a template and not a project file. I guess we could look at how these look a little different. So here's a template backup. When using your normal update backup feature, versus a project has just the number and the name after it. So if you do, for whatever reason, need to restore that backup of that template, go into your project list and click the restore button, import, find that backup, click open. You're going to want to give it a new project number so it doesn't overwrite any existing projects in your list. And it's going to come in as a new project. And from that point, you just need to go ahead and save as template and give it a name, either overriding what's already in there or creating a new one so you don't overwrite it. And it's going to recreate that template. And now you've backed up and restored this template. And that's about all I wanted to show. If there's any questions, I can quickly get to those.
Well, I do think we were able to get to quite a good number of questions, and Michael even asked if he could get a copy of all the questions in the little Q&A window, and so we're going to go ahead and grab that. We can grab that from the Zoom interface, and we'll send that out to him. But I do hope this was very, very helpful for everybody. Keep the ideas coming on what you need to see in a webinar. We really like that. We like hearing from you on what sort of things you want to see. And other than that, hey, it's going to be a great weekend. Enjoy it, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks for attending, everybody. And of course, reach out to us at support@landfx.com if you have any questions, and we will get you answers to those. Thank you.